Hello, everybody, and welcome to our World Today, the Unionist Perspective. Today, we're looking at a few topics that we believe are starting to just highlight different challenges happening in various spaces, and we are trying to explore them from what we perceive to be the Unionist perspective on them. So we'd like you to please feel free to engage with us in the comments related to our topics today and share your insights and any views that you might have, and also potentially any questions that you believe will shed light on the topic. So I'm going to open it up to the team, and we are going to start off with the most topical of our topics, which is what seems to be a crisis on the US-Mexico border. And something that kind of stood out to me in this sense of a crisis is that it's not new. And it seems to swing in roundabouts and cycles, with significant gaps of time passing only to lead to further spikes in immigrants trying to cross the border with some very dire consequences. So I'm going to open it up to the team, and maybe if our US participants would like to maybe just give us some insight into the historical view of what has happened over however many years and decades.
Yeah, I guess well, they're saying that like the people who we read articles from are saying that the number of like encounters at the US-Mexico border in, was it 2021 or did 2022 surpass 2021? I don't remember, but I know for sure in 2021 it was like higher than ever. And there were some previous highs like back in like 2000. So yeah, it's the highest it's been in a while. That was interesting to see that once the pandemic like started, there was like almost the lowest ever number of encounters at the border, with people being like advised not to like leave their homes and stuff. And but over time, like that went up again. And then let's see what else it was saying was that the trends have been like there are a lot more expulsions of migrants versus like detainment of migrants, because they could like, based on a public health order like during the Trump administration, and also like less during the Biden administration, but somewhat, you could like just send migrants right back to the country that they just came through, that they last came through, which in most cases was Mexico. And so that's been going on more than in the past. And also they've seen a lot more people coming from countries other than Mexico. So yeah, and even other than like, it was Mexico, but then also like Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras were like some of the bigger ones. But there's been like more from like South American countries and Cuba and Haiti and stuff. And even increases since like as the pandemic has been like winding down or going into like a less virulent stage, basically, like more people from, they said even like Romania and Turkey like crossing over at the US-Mexico border, which I thought was interesting. So yeah, and that's all I can remember right now of the basic background.
I feel like the question is, like, why are people coming over? But I feel like it's for opportunity, and it's because if there's, bad things going on in their country, they want to come here for better opportunity. I've actually seen it firsthand where I work, because being in like Denver, Colorado, we have a lot of like migrants that come here, and I work in a shelter, so I've seen people like come from Venezuela and stuff, and also Guatemala, Mexico, where yeah, they're just coming for better opportunities, better life. But I think the question too is like, what is the divine thing for the US to do? Because I don't know, I don't think we can accept everybody, but we have to determine like, yeah, what is the divine thing like when like accepting migrants?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify on the numbers because it's so much to remember. But from Brazil, it went from 6,900 to 56,000 from 2000 to 2021. And from Nicaragua, it went from 2,123 to 49,000. And then Venezuela, around 1,000 to now 47,000. So you can see like a huge difference in other countries other than Mexico coming to migrate to the US. And I wanted to pose a question to you guys because during the Trump administration, it was more that they were turned away than, given refugee camps and given a place to stay. But now it's about 50-50. 50% gets turned away and 50% get detained and, later on going through the system. And how do you feel about that? What do you think is like the best solution for that?
I think we talked about that last year. We'd seen a video where under the Trump administration, basically more people were detained or stopped at the border and forced to camp at the border, where gang were basically like could kidnap them for ransom. So pretty much high health and financial hazard for a lot of people, which didn't as we know, help decrease the number of people that tried to cross, specifically because we were coming from farther and farther away, which is like super, super dangerous. And it's surprising that they all come through the Mexico border in an attempt to like pass through the country. And I think what is happening, because like the result of this is that the president of the US and president of Mexico, they met at least twice in order to discuss kind of what to do there. But there was like probably from the former administration and the COVID pandemic, this kind of like toning down of like talking about the crisis and probably not caring about it so much, maybe, which in turn didn't help the amplification of things. And I was saying it's like I don't think it's the fault of any administration, but I think it's a very human thing to say like, oh, well, like this is what's happening now. Let's go, focus on the next thing. And obviously like there was a whole COVID pandemic to focus on, but there was also a lack of like care for people that were staying at the border in unhealthy conditions. And the thing is like now it's growing to a point where it's not just like Mexico and the US. It's not just for Northern Triangle, like Pew Research were saying. It's so many people, so many more people are basically like not opposed to the US like political regimen, and that are trying to cross for an opportunity at something better from their country where things are not so good, politically, financially, etc. And yeah, it just feels like spiritually there was a little bit of like, oh well, we can like go around the problem for now. But now it's like coming back to us like in the face, and we are at the highest encounters that we've ever had. And I don't think like for now there is like a really like a good or a bad solution, a bad way of detaining people. But there's probably a bad way of detaining people, but it's not. I think it's not about the numbers. It's more about like how to treat people in general, not just to reduce numbers, but to really start seeing them as like having a human tunnel in or out of the country, instead of just like trying to reduce a number over time, because I think we've seen that it doesn't work. So I think that's my view. I think it stems from a situation that was even more unhealthy during COVID. I developed under the Trump administration of like people staying somewhere where it's not safe. And it's just like festered into all these little parts of the process of the migrants route that just like help highlight that, hey, maybe it's just like not the way to do. And I really feel like they might be something in like really helping people in a human way, not in quantity, But that's my view, and I don't know a whole lot because I don't live there, and I don't know the conditions, but from like several discussions that we've had in the past, I would say like that's what I feel right now, but it's a little bit murky still.
Yeah, so just in terms of the previous conversations that we've had, so I recall a conversation during our Black Lives Matter series of conversations where this term US-Mexico border crisis was also bandied about. And at that point, there was a massive concern around health and well-being. There was a massive concern around unaccompanied minors. And then, of course, there was, and I think it stemmed out of what then was quite a special thing from the Trump administration, or even Trump saying, let the Mexicans build the wall that keeps them out, kind of thing. And I remember us all feeling like that was quite an obnoxious view on how to handle the crisis at the time. And probably that, if I'm not mistaken, it was probably 2019 or early 2020, just before the pandemic, which sounded like a very almost adolescent way of looking at the problem, because we had the sense that the human dignity was being ignored. And then there was also a conversation probably a few months after the Biden-Harris administration had been implemented, where Texas was actually saying, let's bus them to Kamala Harris's front lawn if she's so concerned about their plight, which we also thought was quite obnoxious, in that if it was a man saying, let's look after them, it would have been very unlikely for the response from any other person to say, well, let's go put them on his front lawn and he can cook and look after them. And so, there was that level of obnoxiousness within the US politics at the time related to this border crisis. But then also, if you look at some of the stats, there's a number of 1.6 odd million encounters which was only ever seen in 1986 and the year 2000. So you can see these valleys and troughs happening that's almost decades apart kind of thing, but it seems like there's probably a greater control in how it's reported, because the encounters, while they say are 1.6 million encounters, they're also able to identify that there are repeat individuals within those encounters. So it's not necessarily 1.6 million people, but it's more that there are 1.6 million encounters, and the greatest majority of those encounters are amongst single adults, which, you know, I mean, and I suppose it speaks to what Isaiah and Sage were talking to in terms of people pursuing opportunities. But also, let's look at the countries where they come from. Many of those countries are have consistently been in certain types of health and safety crises, economic crises. Health and wellness has not been top of mind. There's been a lot of activity from a lot of illicit activity from a drug point of view. So as much as it is going to look for new opportunities, it's also a level of escaping what the current picture is, which was also a topic that we identified, in that there wasn't a sense of people healing at a national level to say, I choose to live in a safe and healthy and well and economically prosperous country, but rather I'm going to leave behind the problem and go and seek it out somewhere else. And sometimes they did it at great peril, at great risk to themselves. So, you know, there's a lot of components to this picture that all play in. But I think one of our biggest caveats at the time when we discussed it, and might have even been in the previous cycle of conversations, was, does the sense of people moving into your country legally or illegally take away from the sense of the availability of resources for the current citizens? And that has always been kind of the caveat of the debate.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about, because I know I don't remember any like actual numbers about this, but you know, like a lot of like industries and stuff and businesses in the US like rely on immigrant labor, like sometimes like undocumented or like illegal immigrant labor, sometimes on like formal legally entering immigrants, right? But the job market in the US has still been like hot, as you could say, or as in like there's, I mean, less so recently, but there's been like, you know, like a lot of job openings, and like just anecdotally, a lot of places you go, if you ask them, like they're like always saying they barely have enough people to keep things running. And, you know, that's even counting that like the numbers that you get from businesses in terms of employment. Like if they're employing undocumented people, they're probably not counting them, you know, as employees. You know, they may or may not be. So even with that in mind, like the job market has still been like having a lot of openings for jobs, you know. So yeah, it just it's interesting, and I feel like that was something to consider, because I was like, well, like there certainly is like a call for, I guess you could call it like a call for love there, like in the US, you know, because like there's certainly like jobs and work to be done, you know. Yeah, I don't know. So, but the other issues other than that, it's more complicated than that and everything. And yeah, what people feel about like employing undocumented people, or or not, but it is a fact in the US, so yeah, I know. I just wanted to throw that out there.
So I
Yeah,
like
and
that you mentioned it. Sorry, Nadia. I just wanted to add something to what Said was saying. I like that you mentioned it because we have a very similar situation with South Africa and places like Zimbabwe, where migrant workers are employed at much lower rates, not reported from any type of employment reporting, but it also seems that they are much more willing to take up roles that South African citizens would consider beneath them. And so, you know, it's another two-edged sword, like, and it's mostly in the service industry where these people are employed, and often for a pittance. So yeah, you know, it's also something that probably is much more global than what we actually anticipate.
And from a unionist perspective, there is an abundance of resources. We're at a limitless world. So when we look at other countries that are increasing in number, trying to migrate here, I think it's good to see what's going on in those countries that are causing this. And Granville, of course, mentioned like the violence, the drug dealings, and all that that's going on. I feel that if we view ourselves as abundant, we have those resources to address it at the core, not just for ourselves, but for other countries, because now it is becoming an issue for us. We have to house humanity in a way in different countries, from different countries, to resolve this issue. So it is our issue to resolve. And just like if we were to resolve homelessness within ourselves, like we would have to go to the core of it and see what they need most to resolve it, because we wouldn't want, you know, society and people in our society to be homeless, just like we wouldn't want people from other countries coming here and being homeless. So thinking from an abundant perspective, I feel like we can resolve it, and we do have the limitless potential to. And I'm thinking from like a perspective of people who seek asylums. Like they come here and they get asylum and they pay taxes, and they're not necessarily citizens. They're not necessarily given all the benefits that citizens are given, but yet their money goes to taxes. Their money goes to the government. So it's like they're paying their way to be here, but yet they're not getting the full benefits of it. And it's like, why ask for taxes then if you're not going to, you know, give an equal give and take?
Well, it's difficult to say because like as soon as you're a citizen of or that you've lived in the US or that you have business in the US, even if you don't, you know, live there permanently or don't have the benefits of it, you have to pay taxes, kind of. So I know this because like French American family and friends, and back then I've had business in the US too, and like, you know, part of the taxes go to there. So it's a system, you know, whether it's good or not, I don't know, but it's, yeah, asylum is like, yeah, it's a difficult question to answer. And it's a difficult question to answer in general because like there are two things here, like from a strictly demographic point of view, like in terms of space, the US would be able to house like 10 to 100 times the people they have, but to house them healthily, like, and it was like 15 years ago. So like, don't quote me on this, but 15 years ago, they would have been able to house 2 or 3 times their people, like the number of people healthily. That's what was said. In order to like really like put into perspective, I guess, the migrants crisis that was already happening. But like, do we want to have that? Is it spiritually, like, even if we're talking about abundance, is it the US jobs to like do that? And also, like, how are we going to put other people in the market? Because there is like still like a lot of job openings, and it's true that illegal immigrants are filling a lot of these jobs, but like if we open the doors there, like is that opening the doors to like something that is like so unrelated that we get into something like the United Emirates, where people are just like kind of feeling like imprisoned there, don't have the same rights, are close to slavery. So there are a lot of questions to take into account. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like I had something else to say, but it's just like, yeah, I guess the thing that is bothering me as well, even if there is space, like, is that in all of this discussion, it's still US and Mexico doing things. Like, it's better than under Trump, where there was no discussion at all. He never would come and meet with the Mexican president, right? But like, how about all the people coming from these countries, and Venezuela, who has been in a crisis for like 3 years more, Brazil is not faring much better at times, you know, Turkey, where people just feel like maybe not safe anymore, would like to seek refuge from, you know, from their physical safety and also for political safety, things like that, Guatemala and things like that. Like, where are these countries in all of this discussion? And there's maybe another component where, because the governments are not ready to say, like, for example, Cuba as well, it's been dire in some places in the society for years. Like, it seems like the governments are not ready to say that, okay, we are in crisis, so we need to get better, kind of living into this bubble of like, well, a bubble where the people suffer because we're not part of a bubble. They take the brunt of a crisis. And so we're not in the discussion, and there's such an imbalance there. And it means that even though you have theoretically the physical space to like welcome all of these people, maybe it's not your job as well. Maybe it is, but there is like, it still needs to be a relationship, because at some point you would have to draw up a boundary anyway. And so it's not siding with anyone politically, but like, how do we treat people as humans? And how do we, keep these countries accountable? Like, hey, you really do have a problem. And if you're not ready to look at it, fine, but like, we can't, I don't want to sound like politically biased, but like, it's really like, when we take the problem into another perspective, like, we can't take the brunt, drawn with other people. And so, yes, I think probably migrants would be like safe inside the country, but also probably there would be a bleeding of energy and resources if there wasn't any regulation, and if we don't involve everyone that needs to be involved in the conversation. So there's a bit of, yes, like, obviously we need to like, there needs to be shelter, sometimes of shelter for these people, and there needs to be protection, and there needs to be discussions, and probably documentations and work and things like that. But also like, it's not like a one-way street where just one or two countries are doing the work for everybody else. So yeah, I hope this gives like wider image of what is happening, even though it's not like the entire thing. Yeah, there's probably a lot to take into account that we're not taking into account right now.
So one of the things that I recall from our previous conversations, and I think Nadia, you started to touch on it, but from the opposite perspective of having a relationship with abundance. And one of the things that actually jogged us, what encouraged us to approach this subject in the first place, was healing the relationship with struggle and lack. And we found that a lot of the decisions at the core were related to struggle and to lack, the feeling that there's not enough, the feeling that there's not enough resources, there's not enough safety, there's not enough love. And then we go to the other sense that Yoreen shared about, yes, we want to love them, but we also need to remember that part of loving is also being able to say no. At some point, you have to stop a constant outflow or inflow. There has to be a balance in order to create health and to maintain health. And so that sense of what is bleeding or being ignored just tells us that there's a greater requirement for a core level of healing related to struggle and to lack. And there's also a core sense of healing in terms of accepting that sometimes you actually do need to stand up and have the courage of conviction in the conviction in your beliefs in the country that you live in without running away from the struggle. And something like Ukraine versus Russia comes up. That, you know, the courage of your conviction in saying, no, you will not do this in my house. No, my house is sacrosanct and you will respect it. And being able to actually bear whatever consequences of your decision then come through that sense of having made a decision. And one of the most powerful things around all of that is that there is a perception and I have the feeling and perception that there's still a lot of people giving away their power or assuming that they don't have power in the first place. And so if you're assuming that you have no power, you're probably going to manifest it in the reality around you.
Yeah, someone watching just commented saying that basically in all of her immigration history, like having like immigrated to, or stayed in like different countries, she's saying she's basically noticing how important it is as an immigrant to heal into the vortex of the place that you're currently living in. I thought that was interesting. Like from the spiritual concept of like vortexes is in like, you have like one vortex is like one feeling or vibration of life or like a way of life, I guess you could say, how life is for you. And that you go to the new vortex and once you reach your like escape velocity by making new choices, you can get pulled into the new vortex. But until you do, the old one sucks you back because you're like so many parts of you are used to it, you know, and other things. So yeah, she's saying she sees many immigrants who don't choose to heal into the energy of the place they are living in and feeling rejected from the citizens of the country and from the government representatives themselves.
Such a good point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is a good point. And I observe that too. And yeah, I definitely feel for people who are in that situation because I do see a lot of people who have that feeling too, you know, but it's something that you have to face in yourself and heal, you know, otherwise you're just saying, I'm just gonna have the sense of like isolation or separation, you know?
Yeah,
So, yeah.
for sure. Yeah. I think like definitely I even touched upon it, like even since the beginning of Russia-Ukraine conflict, where basically like you choose to be in a country. And if you don't choose it anymore, you can choose to stay in another country, but it's not just staying, it's like embodying the energy of that country is super important. And I'm glad like we're touching upon it. I'm also glad we're having this discussion because I feel like what I would like to see happen from now on is to stop, you know, putting into works the fact that welcoming refugees and migrants is like a left-wing decision, but putting a boundary on them is like a right-wing decision. I would like to start seeing that are we doing what feels good and are we doing what is like loving for people and human for people, instead of just seeing like, oh, it's left-wing, oh, it's right-wing, because like what our discussion is showing today is that it's not about that at all. And it feels also good on the other side of the spectrum to say like, hey, I'm not going to do the work for you or sacrifice for you. I can help you and support you, but I can't do it all for you, you know? And it's not saying that to the individual migrant that is crossing the border, otherwise that wouldn't feel compassionate. It's also saying that to the countries of, that are saying, hey, like if you can support like the people there, like there's something that needs to change. You can't keep bleeding onto everyone else. And so healthy boundaries, relationships, just like any one of us would like learn in their day-to-day life. Yeah.
I also think that it's important, as you mentioned it, that potentially to point out where there's potential healing to take place. Because I feel like that also helps to just ground the conversation to say, actually, at the core of it, this is the block. This is the upset. This is the related healing. Because it might not necessarily be specific to the topic, but somebody could probably identify with, hey, I need to maybe consider that in this situation, that's the type of healing that would shift me forward. Another thing that, and I think it's a very much our unionist concept, but something to which Daniela was alluding to was what Jeff and Shaleia have shared with us constantly, is that in order to transcend something, you have to love it completely. And that doesn't mean love the crap. Love where you're at so that you can transcend into something else. And I think that that's probably one of the core messages from what we've been almost talking about for the last 5 minutes, triggered by Daniela's comment on the feed as well.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah. So I feel like probably we should talk about also the other things that we have on the menu today. I'm glad that we went to a place where we actually were able to get clear, because it really felt a bit murky at the beginning. And I kind of want to talk about Russia again, because we've mentioned it like a few times since the beginning of the conversation. And I want to mention the relationship that they're strengthening with North Korea and what you feel is happening there. And maybe it's just like a little sentence of saying like, hey, North Korea is making the same choice as ever, and we're probably seeing like an axis of countries that make the same choices yet again, uniting. But yeah, so first of all, what happened last week, and second of all, like, what do you feel is the lesson there, spiritual thing happening?
I'm going to say something very tongue-in-cheek, but I think it just brings it home. that adversity breeds strange bedfellows. So the enemy of my enemy is my friend. We wouldn't have necessarily been friends, seen eye to eye, even considered walking the same path. But because we've got a common enemy, we are willing to suspend our animosity, to band together, to form what would potentially be almost a counter attack to what our common enemy is starting to kind of bring forth into the situation. So I don't believe that Russia and North Korea would have even well, they might have considered it, but I don't believe that they would have had such a strong sense of, oh, let's start sharing resources and knowledge, if they weren't both saying, well, actually, let's just be partners in crime for a little bit. Because, it's literally, it's almost, and it is, my sense is that it's a little bit of partners in crime, but it's the art of war. The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
They did have kind of like relationship for a long time, because I don't know, I didn't send you guys the video that I saw, but North Korea is basically virtually impossible to escape now. It was difficult before, but it's even more impossible. And they strengthen the border, like basically people were passing through Russia, not South Korea, because obviously this border is like very much armed already. But like the northern border is even more armed on both sides there. And so like it seems like they're bonding, as you said, in some type of like weird army bands kind of thing.
A weird level of trauma bonding, except they are the perpetrators of the trauma.
Oh yeah, kind of. Yeah, it's kind of like, I don't want to say crime bonding, but look at their history, it kind of feels it kind of feels like that. So yeah, I'm not going to say anymore. It's just my feeling. Nadia, what did you want to say?
What surprised me the most was that North Korea confirmed that the Russian president was saying he was under attack from Ukraine, and his war was rightfully sought because he needed to neutralize the situation. And North Korea's president was like, yeah, you're right. Like, I see that you need to do this war for your own sake and for your own like safety. And it boggles my mind that like, I don't know if he actually believes that, but he said it just to support his crime friend. So, yeah.
Nadia, when you say that, it's kind of like two mental patients talking to each other.
Actually, it really is. And we've seen that Vladimir Putin is going through health issues, right? And he's shaking. He has like an autoimmune, some kind of disease. And that relates to your body attacking yourself. And he's literally attacking himself. And North Korea is reaffirming that, yes, you should go to war because someone else is attacking you. So, yeah, two mental patients.
Well, even if there wasn't any mental health issues involved, like we're on a planet, like we kind of know now spiritually that we're on a planet where people can perpetrate lies without seeing the consequences directly. And so they can say lies and live in the lie without having the consequence of hell right at their doorstep. So I think it's more about that, like seeing that they're in a society where it's permissive to be in a lie. They just like take it all home and get the best out of it, I guess, for now.
So my sense is, and I know we're saying the mental patient thing, but in tongue-in-cheek kind of way. But my sense is it's the justification of the behavior is based on a very strong projection. So I project my intent to attack and then attack. And the resultant fact is that that sense of projection is being reflected back in, whether it hits home or not is immaterial. The fact of the matter is the mirror that the thing that's being mirrored back is the core, and the core is very much centered on attack and defensiveness. And so in that way, you're very easily able to justify what would have been illogical actions by a reasonable person.
In a sense, ego is insanity. Of course it is. So when you're saying it tongue in cheek, as a unionist perspective, this is insanity to believe in their righteousness that they're going forward in. So I wanted to add that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from their perspective, they're banding together against the West, which Kim Jong-un was calling imperialistic. And the West certainly, I mean, these like Europe and the US and others certainly do have a history of imperialism, but they also have like giant economies that provide a lot of value to the world and influence the world a lot. And other countries have the ability to build themselves up in the way that feels good to them and that they see fit if they want to. And that's what that's what Russia and North Korea are resisting, because they've always kind of tried to do things in a way that's like exploitative or illicit or, basically like North Korea, a lot of its funding comes from illegal drug trafficking, like a lot of their funding comes from that. So basically they are correct in saying that the West is like quote unquote against them, but it's more like the West is against their choice to like defy conventions that are meant to create peace and stability in the world and a place where you can feel safe, so they are like kind of correct, but not for a good reason, so yeah, I think that's more of what they are talking about, because it doesn't really seem like there's ever actually a threat to Russia's sovereignty, as we know. Like, yes, NATO has expanded to Russia's borders, and yes, Russia has been protesting that since like the end of since the beginning of NATO and everything like that. But like, Russia's moved troops away from its borders with NATO countries. Like Finland just joined, and Norway has been for a long time, and they've moved all their troops away from the borders, to go into Ukraine and fight that war, so it's just, it doesn't really make any sense. They can try to justify it, but it doesn't really do anything. And and it does seem really transactional, because I mean, Russia has condemned North Korea for different things in the past, but nowadays that's not happening anymore, because Russia sees no benefit in like paying even lip service to the West and other countries. So that's gone away. And basically it's just like, you have something I want, North Korea wanting like stuff to help their space program and their surveillance satellites, and maybe food, and maybe even like helping them gain nuclear capabilities even more or something. And then Russia needing like artillery shells, which is a crazy thing to think about. I learned that apparently artillery shells that go bad after a while, the explosives crystallize. And so they can explode randomly or misfire. And that's caused a lot of accidents for Russia. So they're just seeking more artillery shells from North Korea. But North Korea also has some really old artillery shells too. So I'm kind of like, it makes me question how useful this is.
I don't know, but they bury it in Siberia afterwards. So problem solved.
They what?
That's our point of view. Yeah. Yeah, so it feels pretty opportunistic. You said it while in the visit of a jet plant area anyway, so it's basically that. It's funny how is calling the West imperialist when he's the emperor. And also, yeah, I think there is just this this arrogance and ignorance from China and North Korea, especially of recognizing that their richness, I'm not going to say wealth because it's not actual wealth, but the richness and the foundation of their government actually comes from also building in accordance to the world. So being close to the world, that's fine, but like illegally still having ties to the world in order to get rich, that's fine too. And I think it is pretty hypocritical from them. But yeah, and then the rest is like the West is bad or they're trying to attack us. We come into like irrational territory. So I'm not even going to say things about that. But I just wanted to mention how far they are going into their ways just because they haven't seen I guess the accountability quite yet. And we know that, like we know that we have a minefield in Russia, we know that there are crises, we know that it's built on shells, not good shells, definitely. So yeah, I don't know. It's just it. Like it's two countries. And yes, the last thing that I wanted to say is that I don't think it was even for them or for our benefits that they said this. I think it was pretty much for their own internal propagandas, like making sure that people remember that Russia is our friend because the West is like against us and is imperialistic. It felt almost like more turned at the North Korean people than anything else. If we really feel into it. Because like no one else, like it's exactly like the G20, like no one else is believing the lie that Russia is under attack. Like there are laughs when anyone says that. So he's not saying that for us, it's saying that for like the people he's trying to keep under his scope.
So I think something that's probably also worth mentioning is that there has to be fuel to their propaganda machine, for the reason that their own citizens will eventually revolt against the decisions that they're making and stop supporting them. And I mean, some of the things that we've discussed before was the military conscription in Russia that just became significantly more and more ridiculous as this war with Ukraine went on. There was also the sense of, if you supported the war machine and if you actually participated as a patriot, that the country would look after you and your family. So, buying loyalty, but also forcing loyalty. So there's a lot of almost human right abusive type behavior internally, and there has to be this propaganda of we're right, because everybody's not going to interrogate the situation as much as other people. And again, oftentimes it is easier to see things more clearly when you're standing on the outside of it than when you're when you are in the situation. So there's a lot, again, at play here from a spiritual point of view in terms of, are you so entrenched in the problem that you are not seeing the trees for the woods? And then another thing is, are you misconstruing the mirror for a window? So are you looking at this reflection and thinking you're seeing other people in that way? Or are you forgetting that life is reflecting your behavior back to you?
Probably forgetting. I think a lot of people come to Earth and before we prepare for this life, we know that we come here for a lesson, and then we get here, and in the density of like physical reality, we forget. And so that's the whole core of the teachings of Union, is like to remember what we're actually here for and which choice we actually want to choose. But if you forget and you play into the separation, which created this world, which is like we kind of like want to play God and have a choice and it'll feel good, then you're going to play out into this pattern until you run out, because eventually you will run out since it doesn't even exist. So I think it's if we go deep at the core, it's just that simple answer of like we forget the actual choice and lesson that we're here to learn.
Well, here's another perspective. If they don't perpetrate this behavior, how does humanity realize that the contrast is not where we want to live? So they may actually just be completely serving their purpose, and we're just not seeing it from that perspective. I mean, it's not a great purpose, but sometimes that purpose needs to be served in order for the contrast to be highlighted so that new choices can be made.
Yeah, if you just contrast as your teacher, which, yeah, I get, but yeah. Any last words, you guys?
Yeah, I see that in like the choice that we're making, and I want to bring it back to the G20 summit, that no one really stood up to Russia. No one has still put their foot down and come into an alliance with other countries and said, no, this is not how it's going to go down. So we're still in that, creating that strong boundary and continue to perpetuate giving that strong boundary so that it can be, well-grounded.
Cool. That feels like the conclusion of our conversation today. So yeah, Sage and Isaiah, anything else from you just before I wrap up?
No.
Perfect. Okay, guys and ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the conversation today. I think we delved into some very interesting perspectives on those topics, but also highlighted some very core truths to consider related to our topics. So thank you for the conversation. Thank you to the people that have been engaging with us in our comments section. Also, please feel free to like and subscribe to our Church of Union YouTube channel. And we look forward to seeing all of you again next week. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.